Yes, let's do it. Okay, hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. So excited to be here. Just a little thing. So on the screen, you'll probably see my face and then also the slides. Feel free to double click on the slide window. It'll just enlarge the screen a bit. Yep, let's do it. So today we're going to be talking about coding interviews and how you can ace your next coding interview. Make sure you use the hashtag ShellHacks20 on Twitter. We'd love to see your highlights from this weekend, and this is also a great way to interact with us. Cool. A quick intro. My name is Shuba. I'm a software engineer at Twitter. I go by pronouns she, her. You can find me on Twitter at Shubaswamy. It's my first name and last name with an extra Y at the end. And today we'll start with a short overview. Then we'll dig into the details of how to ace your next coding interview. Then we'll also spend some time walking through an example together so you can get an idea of what this might look like in action. And then you'll also have a chance to learn more about Twitter and applications, which are opening up soon. We'll also have some time at the end for a Q&A, and I'm going to make this like a Ask Me Anything style, so feel free to ask me questions about my presentation today or what it's like working at Twitter. So I was an intern at Twitter last summer, and I just recently joined as a new grad a couple months ago. And I currently work on a team as a software engineer called Odd Platform. And what we do is write software for the millions of requests per second that come into Twitter that basically handles all the authentication and authorization. So I basically help keep the platform safe and secure. And I love working at Twitter. The people I get to work with are incredible, and I also get to make a real positive impact through my work every day. And the reason we're here today is to talk about the interviewing process. The interviewing process for me in college involved lots of figuring out and practicing. There were many times when I failed when it came to interviewing. So today I'll be sharing some of the tips that helped me succeed over time. And I'm very passionate about this topic. I really feel like this information should be more widely available. These days, I also volunteer on the weekends to mentor underrepresented students practice for coding interviews. And here's an overview of the process for landing a technical interview. Today, we'll be specifically focusing on how you can get prepared to ace your next coding interview. And I want to start off by saying, interviews are tough because you're putting yourself out there and it feels like you're being evaluated. But I really want you to think of interviews as your time to shine. You got the interview because you're qualified. Now, this is your chance to show them what you got. And it's always helpful to approach interviews from a problem-solving perspective and treat it like a conversation you're having with a friend. I think that shift in mindset really helps do better in interviews. Okay. And then now we're going to go over an overview of what you can expect. So the main point of the interview is to really evaluate your problem-solving skills. The interviewer really wants to get a sense for what it's like working with you. How do you tackle and think about hard problems? And interviews aren't all or nothing. You really want to approach these interviews from a problem-solving mindset. Think and talk through the trade-offs as you walk through the problem. And it's still very possible to get hired without solving the whole problem. I think the main thing is if you get stuck, the most important thing is to never give up. Keep trying for the whole duration of the interview, even if it feels like you're not making forward progress. And the point of the interview is not to trick you, but you do need a basic understanding of data structures and algorithms. You may have already taken a data structures and algorithms course in college. If you haven't yet, I would strongly encourage you to do so. But if you don't have the opportunity to do so, don't worry. I'll go over some resources towards the end about what you can study up. Also, you don't need to memorize these data structures. Just make sure you understand the space and time trade-offs. I think it really pays off to focus on the fundamentals. Another thing to note is that interviews are language agnostic. Feel free to use whatever language you're comfortable with, whether that's Python, Java, C++. Again, the point of the interviews isn't necessarily to quiz like your specific knowledge about like a language or a tool. It's more to get an idea of what it's like working with you every day. And also, you can't really be practicing. Practice communicating while solving the problem, and make sure you practice a lot. A large part of the interview is just about how you communicate. And it feels a little unnatural because we're not used to constantly thinking out loud, you know? Also, it's important to always communicate the limits of what you know and don't know. Coding interviews are very unlike what you might encounter in your classroom or even at work. So it's very important to practice. And typically you'll have anywhere from 45 to 60 minutes to solve through a whole problem. And I think really practicing a lot helps you solve problems within like the time frame. Okay. And this is the overview of the framework we'll be using for today. I'm going to go over each point in detail in a bit, but this framework really just helps break down the approach we'll be taking to solve the problem, and it helps break down the coding problem, which might be really overwhelming at first, into much like digestible chunks. Along with the framework, I'll also be walking through an example as we go through some of the tips, so it's easier to see how you can apply them in real life. So this is the problem. Given an array of integer nums and an integer target, return the indices of the two numbers such that they add up to target. So what does this mean? So let's say you have two inputs that you're given. So you have an array called nums. So in this example, let's say you have 3, 2, 4 as an array, and then your target value that you're given is 6. So your output, in this case, you'd want to output is 1 and 2. That's because 2 plus 4 add up to 6, and the indices of 2 and 4 are 1 and 2. So there's an explanation. And I got this problem off of LeetCode, which is a really popular website that's very helpful to use for practicing coding interview questions. And you can find a lot more questions like these. Let me see, what questions do we have? Yep, the two-sum problem. Yeah, this problem is quite popular. I think it's like one of the first problems that come up, so I thought it would be a good example for this workshop. Okay, thank you. Yeah, feel free to ask questions. I'll try to stop in between slides to get to them, and we'll also have time at the end to answer any other questions. Cool. So the main thing you want to do before jumping into any problem is really understanding. So how do you go about comprehending a problem? So here are some tips that might be helpful. So when you hear the prompt, you'll generally be eager to solve the problem right away. But you want to make sure you and your interviewer are on the same page. So you want to clarify any assumptions and ask lots of questions. The first thing I think that really helps is repeating the question back. So take a few seconds, can be like just 30 seconds to make sure you really understand the problem. Another great way to really understand the problem is also ask clarifying questions. I think one thing that's very helpful to do is check with test cases. I think it's a great way to make sure you're on the right path. And I recommend walking through 2 or 3 examples. You can use an example that's like very simple, very easy case to make sure you have the problem understanding right. But then I'd also make sure that the examples you walk through also include 1 or 2 edge cases. I think that really helps get a better understanding of like what you're solving for. Because I think the main thing is it's very easy to end up solving the wrong problem, you know? So you want to use the first few minutes to make sure you have a good plan. So let's say we're given the two-sum problem as shown here. What are some questions that come to your mind right now? Like pretend like you're in an interview. What questions would you ask to the interviewer to clarify like assumptions that you have? Let me know in the chat. Yeah, these are all great questions. Are the integers sorted? Are the nums positive only? How large will the array be? That's a really good one. Oftentimes software engineers deal with solving a lot of problems at scale. So asking like, what scale are we talking about here is a great question. Where am I getting the data from? How big can your input get? Yep. How to output? Yep. Can we add the same number to itself? Yeah, that's a really good question. So like, I like that question a lot because that's like one of the edge cases. Yep. So yeah, these are all great answers. Thank you all for sharing that. So I think, so usually when you see a problem, I think one of the first things that you can do, especially if it's a complex problem, is to just extract the information. And that might look something like this. You can keep it brief. So here I'm just gonna write out like, what are we given? Basically, we're given nums, which is an array of integers, and we're given target, which is an integer. And what are we expected to return? We're expected to return the indices of the two numbers. And then in addition to all the great questions that you all have written in the chat, here are some examples of other questions you could ask. So you can ask the interviewer, is it possible to have multiple solutions? And the interviewer might say, let's just assume that each input would have exactly one solution. And then you could probably also ask, can we use the same element twice, which I think someone mentioned in the chat. You know, like this really shows that you're thinking about the edge cases, like can you count the same number twice for the sum? And the interviewer will say, no, let's just assume we can't use the same element twice. Does the order of the elements that you return in matter? And the interviewer will say, let's just return the answer in any order, it doesn't matter. So these are the type of questions you want to be thinking about, just like how you all have been talking about it in the chat, just really showing the interviewer that you're thinking about different scenarios and the edge cases. And then in addition to the questions, I'd also maybe give an input or two to clarify that I'm on the right track. So I tell my interviewer, so what you're saying is if we're given an input nums, that's an array like this with 2, 7, 11, and 15, and let's say our target is 9. What you're saying is that our output would be 0, 1. So at this point, your interviewer will clarify, or if you're on the wrong path, they'll kind of give you hints like, no, you're thinking about it the wrong way. So this is a really great way to make sure you comprehend the problem. And then also make sure to always include edge cases when you walk through examples. So here is another example. So I tell the interviewer, so what you're saying is even if we have like just 3 and 3 in an array and we have our target value 6, our output would be 0 and 1. So that's kind of like the first step. And any questions? Okay, cool. And then next step, so once you've sort of clarified your assumptions with the interviewer, you really want to take a couple of minutes to think about how you're going to go about solving the problem. So what does this mean? So this is where your prior data structures and algorithms knowledge is really going to come in handy. When you see the problem, the great thing about already having like practice with data structures and algorithms problems is that you can match it to the appropriate algorithm and data structure. Because sometimes, you know, like in the two-sum problem that I just showed you guys, it's pretty clear that it's an array problem. You know, like some solutions probably come to mind right away, but sometimes the problems can be very indirect and you don't necessarily know like what data structure or algorithm to use right away. So in this case, just like practicing over time really helps a lot. And the main thing is to really verbalize your thought process. It can feel a bit unnatural to explain your whole thought process just because we aren't used to that every day, but it's very important to explain the trade-offs and the decisions you're making along the way. Make sure you're critically thinking about the problem and always accounting for edge cases, as I mentioned. It's really about how you solve the problem, and you want to show the engineer that you're thinking about, you know, all the different possible scenarios. Again, just think out loud through the whole process I think it's totally okay to take a few seconds or minutes and let the interviewer know that you need like a bit of time to think about it. But I think the expectation is for the majority of the interview to just be talking out loud. Also, I think this is really helpful if you're just really stuck on the problem and just don't know how to go about the problem. It really just helps you verbalize, and the interviewer might be able to give you hints or guide you on the right path. So for this problem, this is sort of where I'd mention what I'm thinking about for solving this problem. So let me know like what you guys think are some ways we can solve this problem at first. There's no right or wrong answers here. Just like if you were talking with the interviewer, how you'd go about solving the problem. Yep. You guys got the answer. So yeah, this is where I sort of explain my thought process. So I would definitely explain by starting off with the naive solution, which is using the 2 for loops, as Roy said, using the double looping. And as many of you are saying in the chat, the hash table way is the way I'd use as the optimal solution. Yep, exactly. We subtract one value from the array to from the target to keep track of that value. Yep. Wow, you all are so smart. You already got the answer, but that's basically what I was going to say. So I definitely walk through the different scenarios and the trade-offs that you're thinking about. Let's see. So the first one I'd explain to the interviewer is that I'm thinking about the brute force solution. So I'll mention to the interviewer. So I was thinking that maybe we could loop through each element in nums, and then we have another loop that finds if a value of target minus that value exists. And then this would basically have a time complexity of O of n squared, since we have 2 for loops that are looping through all the different values in nums. And then because we're not storing anything extra here, the space would be O of 1. But I think I can improve this solution. I think maybe if we trade space for some more speed, maybe we can use a hash table. So I'd use a hash table, and basically what I'm going to do is add every value and the index to the hash table. And then I'm going to check if that value target minus nums exists in our hash table. And basically, even though we're increasing our space here because we're storing the hash table, our time complexity drops to O of n. And at this point, you'll get some sort of a direction from the interview. Like usually they'll want you to write out the more optimal solution. So the interviewer might say something like, that sounds great. Let's solve for the problem using the hash table. We're getting smarter watching you. I'm glad this can be helpful. Yep. And again, I want to emphasize you want to be, explaining your thought process and showing the interviewer that you're really thinking about these problems critically. So in this example, I talk about the space and time complexity and the trade-offs that I'm making. So talking about things like that is very important. Yep. And language, it can be language agnostic. This is just like, I'm just writing out like pseudocode for now, but later on when I solve the problem, today I'll be solving it in Python. But as I said earlier, interviews are pretty language agnostic. Interviewers don't really usually care about the language you use. And the next step is making a game plan. Also, side note, this is one of my favorite GIFs of all time. Who are we all rooting for this NBA season? Heat, Miami Heat, yep, makes sense. Lakers, Clippers, ooh, oh, the Rockets. Yep, go Warriors. I'm a Warriors fan myself, but it's okay, we didn't make it this year. Okay, back to our presentation. So what does this planning step look like? So once you figure out with the interview or what solution you want to proceed with, you want to quickly like map out how you're going to go about implementing the solution. So one thing that can help with this phase is visualizing the problem, especially if it's a problem that has to deal with like a graph or a binary tree or or a linked list, some of the more like visually based problems. It really helps to just like draw out the problem. Although I know most interviews these days, especially in COVID times, are on the computer, and sometimes it can be really hard to just draw out stuff. I think even if you can like do a little quick diagram on the screen by typing, that would be great. But if not, you can also write pseudocode, which is just like a rough draft in like plain English of what you'll be implementing. Also, it's totally okay to start with a brute force solution and always optimize it in the later steps that you go through. And as always, if you have time towards the end of your interview, you can always implement the optimized solution. If not, you can just talk through your more optimized solution as well. So for this problem, this is how I go about writing the pseudocode. And it doesn't have, there's no right or wrong answer here, and it doesn't have to be this complicated. It's more of like a step to just help you out for your next step where you'll be writing the actual code. So this is how I go about writing the pseudocode. So I would just type out on the screen a couple of bullet points. So I'll have a for loop that goes through every index and nums, and then I'll take the difference of target and the value at the index. And then I'll have an if statement to check if the difference already exists in our hash map. And then if the value is found, then we know that's the answer. So I would just return that difference or the index of that difference in the index. And then if we don't find the value, then we add that value to our hash table. And as I mentioned, if you have a problem that deals with like graphs, trees, linked lists, it's just really great way to implement it. And no, this is the hash table method. The brute force way would be to have the double for loops. Cool. And then all the steps up until now is to really set you up for success in this part. So that when you do get to writing code, which is this part, you won't have to worry about like how to do so or worry about making any mistakes. I think for splitting up your time in the interview, you'll want to aim for spending the most time during this step. Yeah, I love the GIF too. So cute. So going about implementing it, here are a few things to keep in mind. Again, really want to emphasize that you want to explain every decision and trade-off as you write it out. And then you also want to make sure you make use of good coding practices. So you probably already know what good coding practices look like from classes and stuff. So that means writing comments, splitting up your code into classes or functions if it's like a really big program. Also, even including descriptive names for variables goes a long way. And for this problem, this is how I go about writing my solution in Python. And just a quick note, because I already have the code written out, I'm going to go through this slide pretty quickly, but just remember in the interview, you might end up spending most of the time on this part. So I'd start with the function definition. So as I'm going through the code, this is how I'd explain it. So here we have our function definition, and I'm going to call it toSum. We're going to give it our inputs, nums and target. And then the next thing I'm going to do is declare an empty hash table called numsMap to store our nums values and their indexes. And then now what I'm going to do is have a for loop. In the for loop, we have our variable I, which is going to go through every single index in nums. And then after that, we'll have our difference value, which we'll call diff. And what diff is going to do is take target minus the value of the nums at that index. And then we're going to have an if statement after that to check if that difference value exists in our hash map currently. And then if it does, then that means we've found our answer. So I'm just going to return the index that we're currently at and also the index that we're storing in the hash map. And then, but if we don't find our value, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add that value to our hash map. So I'm going to set the value of the nums as the key and then the index as the value of the hash map. And that's pretty much our program. I mean, this is like a super simple problem, but this is to just give you an idea of what it might look like. And then just for some reference, I'd also make sure I include some comments. So it might look something like this, where I have like comments about the input types and also just a comment of like what the variable diff does. Again, these are just like examples of what you can potentially do in your interview. Yep, it's totally okay to go with the optimized solution first. So I think the advantage of going for solving the optimized solution is that it really shows, I think that is an advantage. So definitely go for the optimized solution if you can. But if you do struggle with that, then it's totally okay to default to the brute force solution. Oh, thank you. Yeah, the design is really nice. I did not design these slides. Thankfully, we already had templates at Twitter. So yeah. Yeah, Python's a really great language, especially for interviewing. I feel like Python, okay, I might be biased here, but I feel like Python's really the best language to interview with because it often just feels like I'm writing in plain English. So it's very easy for me to translate my logic in my head to like actual code. And then for learning Python, I would just, there are lots of really great tutorials on Medium or YouTube. I'd also check out Code Academy and just start doing like Python exercises. Okay. Yep. Yeah, I'll go over the how to move from brute force to optimized solution in the next step. So once you've written out your whole code, you really want to make sure you test your code. So here's where you'll want to check for like glaring logical errors that you might not have caught when thinking out the problem or writing it out. One way to do it is to manually test the solution with 1 or 2 examples. Many times you might not have the opportunity to compile and run your code. So this is a great way to do that. But if you do have the opportunity to compile and run, especially because of COVID, a lot of interviews are now just virtual. So you might have the option to just run your code. So make sure to use like print statements if you do have the ability to debug. But either ways, you should at least run through 1 or 2 examples manually. And one of the big things is that the interviewer is just looking to see if you can catch and fix your own mistakes. So this is a great way to show that, you know, you're proactive about like checking your code and making sure it does what it is intended to do. So for this problem, let me run through an example of how I'd go through a manual output. So I'm just going to take an example. It's just a random example. So I'm going to be like, so just to make sure my code works, I'm going to run through it quickly to double check. So let's say we're given input nums, which is an array of 3, 2, and 4, and our target 6. So the first thing is our hash map is empty at first. So then we go through our for loop. In our for loop, index I goes through every single index in our nums array. So in this case, we would go through 0, 1, and 2. And then because we're still in the first iteration of the for loop, our I would be 0. And then we go on to our next line where we take the difference of target minus nums. In this case, since target is 6 and our value is 3, our diff in this case would be 3. And then we'd be checking if that diff value exists in our hash map already. But since there's nothing in our hash map yet, we evaluate the if statement to false. And then because that if statement evaluated to false, we jump to the else, where we would add the values 3, 0 to our hash table. And then for our next iteration, we have I equals 1. Our diff is 4 because we have 6 minus 2, which is 4. Again, we check to see if that diff exists in our hash map, and 4 is not yet in our hash map. So we end up adding the value 2 and 1 to our hash map. So currently in our hash map, we have the values 3, 0, and then 2, 1. And then for our last iteration, we have I equals 2. And then here we would have diff equals 2 because we have 6 minus 4. And then, oh, but wait, 2 already exists in our hash map as a key. So that means the if statement in this case evaluates to true. So what I'm going to do is return our answer since we found it. So in this case, we'd return 1 and 2 as the final answer. So yeah, I think that makes sense, and it seems to be proved by our example here. So that's kind of like how I'd go through the example. Again, I'm just like writing it out, but in your actual interview, you can just like talk through it. Yeah, you can, depending on also, time constraint is a huge thing. That's something you'll get better at as you practice. But definitely pick shorter examples if you're running out of time. In diff 6 minus 3, so we're doing 6 minus 3, like 6 is target and 3 is the first value in the array. And at that point, our hash map is empty just because we declared it above and we haven't added anything to it so far. So it evaluates to false because there is currently nothing in it. Yeah, this is totally a great format. Thank you. I think it's really helpful to visualize it. So when you practice, just write it out. Super helpful. Okay, and the last step is evaluating and optimizing your solution. So what does this mean? So you'll basically want to review what you've implemented so far. And the first thing you'll want to do is evaluate the runtime and the space complexity. So when you state your runtime and space complexities, state what the complexities represent. And this is also where sort of your prior knowledge and algorithms and data structures will come very handy. And another thing you also want to do is see if you can make it run better. Sometimes there's no further improvements that you can make because you've already implemented the more optimized solution, and that's okay. But most times there's always some improvement you can make to your code, and it's very important to have that discussion with your interviewer to solve the problem. So you'll want to think about questions like, what trade-offs are you making? What improvements can you make? So for this problem, our time complexity is O of n, where n is the number of elements in nums. And the reason is we traverse a list of n elements once with the for loop. And then a hash table supports really fast lookups on average, almost near constant time. So this makes our time complexity for this solution O of n. And then also talk about the space. So in this case, our space would be O of n, where n is the number of elements in nums. And then it's O of n because we're storing the hash table which takes up space, and we end up storing at most n elements. And then essentially what we're doing here compared to the brute force solution is trading in space for the runtime we save. Okay. Cool. Also, yeah, so these are really all the steps. That's really it. You got this. I hope you all crush your next coding interview. And I also want to say that a lot of it is also about the confidence you carry. So keep this in mind. When in doubt, ask yourself, what would Beyonce do? Would she apply for a job? Nope. She'd just show up one day like I work here now. So everyone, be like Beyonce, our queen. And just some final tips to close with that can be helpful. The book, Cracking the Coding Interview, which a lot of you might have already heard of, is a great book to go through the topics of data structures and algorithms, LeetCode and HackerRank to practice problems. You can also use these websites like these to schedule mock interviews with other people who are looking to also get practice. You can use Glassdoor for like company-specific questions. Also wanted to plug CodePath. They have really great resources for practicing for interviews and also classes that are free for practicing for interviews. And it's actually the organization I volunteer for. And coincidentally, the CEO of CodePath is giving a talk right after this one, so you should also attend that one. Friends are also a great way to get good practice. And the main thing really is to practice thinking out loud. Over time, you'll start to recognize patterns in these problems, the more problems you solve. It also helps to practice these problems with the timer so you can get used to solving these problems in a time crunch. Also, look out for hints from the interviewer. My general rule of thumb is that the interviewer is saying something because it's always somehow relevant to the problem. And this can really help, especially if you're like stuck on a problem. And I think always, demonstrate interest in the company, be enthusiastic. I think that really goes a long way. Most of the time you'll have time at the end to ask the interviewer questions about their work and company. So definitely go into the interview prepared for that ahead of time. With that said, I'm gonna pass it on to Kelly and Rihanna. Take it away, Kelly. Oh no. Okay. It seems like Kelly is having trouble getting in, so I'll just go ahead and plug the Twitter you stuff. Oh, there we go.
I'll do it. Don't worry, I got you, Kelly. Kelly, can you try to log in at all? Rihanna, anybody up in the what you might call it, in the thing where it says like use your audio? I don't even know. We're requesting it. Requesting it to who? Let me see. Invite to video call. Here you go, Kelly. I think I got you. No, did I? Anyways, I can do it because I know a lot of you are waiting.
Perfect. Yes.
While we figured out what's going on with Kelly's. All right, so for the Twitter U application, it's open on October 1st. Everybody, please go to t.co/apply. That's what we're all applying. I bet there's how many people in this room? I feel like 350. So I hope that I get 350 applications on October 1st just from here. Yes, Ian, you're absolutely right. October 1st. The Hype team is telling you right now, go to t.co/apply and apply. Tweet at us using the hashtag ShellHacks tweetup20 all weekend. Not only are we reading it, but our recruiters from Twitter U are also reading it. From Twitter Careers are reading it. And sometimes you can even get retweeted by our careers page. So you don't know, you might become Twitter famous for like a weekend. So there you go. Follow us at Twitter U. That's where you're gonna get all the good stuff. That's where we tell you where we're going, when we're going, what the Hype team is doing, what the business recruiting team is doing. So make sure you follow us at Twitter U. And let's go to the next slide. So t.co/tweetup20. Let me see if I can maximize the video. Please click twice. Here you go. So remember that we have 2 challenges this weekend. The first challenge is improving the health in the platform. So if you look at how conversation evolve at Twitter, one tweet can spark several conversations and threads, each of which can grow in length and complexity as more we chime in. So Twitter gives everyone the power to create and share ideas and information instantly without barriers. Help us improve the health. Help us improve those conversations to stay healthy, to stay diverse, but promoting using the hashtag healthy conversation and using our Twitter API. So if you need access to our Twitter API, go to t.co/shellhacks tweetup20. That's what you get access to Twitter API. And then our second challenge, which of course is our favorite challenge, is the meme challenge. So just create a meme and put it on Twitter and use the hashtag ShellHacks20. You can put as many memes as you want. So if you want to put 50 memes per day, we got it. Don't you worry. Only one meme is going to be declared the winner. So go for it. Go for them. Last night, we're already looking at the memes. Shuba, have you seen those memes at all? They are hilarious. Hilarious.
Amazing.
Yeah, you guys are already killing it. So please go ahead and keep sending us memes. We're already cracking up with them. And we send them to our coworkers like, oh my God, did you see this? So believe me, a lot of people at Twitter have eyes on your memes. So today we also have Twitter office hours from 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern time. Enrique, he's a software engineer at Twitter. He's going to be there. And then from 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern time, Aisha, who's also a software engineer, is going to be there. And we've telling you all weekend, one of the best ways for you to get into Twitter is to get in front of our engineers, in front of our people, talk to them, get to know them, tell them what you can offer, have those conversations. So this is a great way for you to get your foot in the door. Go to those office hours, ask questions, get to know them, and we'll be here all weekend. So if you want to meet with me, Kelly, or Rihanna, we're here. We're doing, we're on Discord, we're checking everything. So yeah, we'll be here all weekend. We cannot wait to see more of you. Thank you everybody so much. And thank you, Shuba. You did a great job. Yeah.
Really.
I got here killed it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, this was,
am I missing another slide or are we?
No, I think that's it.
Okay,
but
cool.
Thank you, Julie. That was amazing.
Thank you.
So definitely apply to Twitter U. Also, you can follow me on Twitter. My handle is Shubha Swami. So with an extra Y at the end. Also, my DMs are open if anyone has questions about, the whole process. Personally, like I just went through the new grad process not too long ago myself, so can probably help. Yeah, and with that being said, I'm going to open it up to any questions people have. Let me know.
We've got 10 more minutes. So Shuba, everybody follow Shuba. Let's make her go viral.
Follow me.
345 followers this weekend from this conversation. I hope so. Okay, everybody follow Shuba. So Q&A time. Make sure you put your questions. I'm gonna log out of here and leave you to it. Okay. Perfect. Thank you, Shuba. Great job.
Thank you. Actually, do you mind answering some of the questions about hiring?
They're asking. Hey, cool. Yeah, sorry. They're asking questions about hiring. Is Twitter hiring computer engineers? Yes, we are. We are hiring computer engineers. We have everything from machine learning, software engineers, data scientists, you name it. So if you go to t.co/teams, you can see the teams that hire at Twitter and what they're hiring for. So that's t.co/teams. How much do the Twitter Academy interviews differ from regular software intern interviews? Ian, it's the interviews are usually the same. We do 2 45 minutes interviews that are technical and one that is behavioral. So the only difference, it will be Twitter Academy. For you to be able to apply to Twitter Academy, it's for underrepresented students in tech, but overall it's the same process. Development or competitive coding?
One. I'm not sure if there's a specific question there, but I mean, I would say interviews, if you're wondering about interviews, it's definitely more focused on like how you go about problem solving and how you'd approach your work as a software engineer, like, and the development cycle. I do know, like, I've talked to other people who've done competitive coding, who've said that that's helped with the interviews, but I personally do not have any experience with that myself. Julie, do you have any tips for resumes?
Yes. Yes. So we've been saying it all weekend, and I love answering these questions because I want to make sure everybody gets it. Your resume just needs to show that you can get the job done for the job that you're applying for. So I know that in a lot of schools they might teach you like put all of your experience, and if you were a bartender, make sure you add it there because that shows that you can multitask. At the end of the day, the things that I'm looking for are the things that are relevant to the job. So make sure that in your resume, what you have on top, right, super focused, is what is relating to the job that you're applying for. So always try to customize your resume. You can always have just an outline, but always try to customize it to the job that you're applying for. Make a bullet point so it's easy to read. Make it simple. Don't go over one page. I would say 2 pages at most, but 2 pages is when you're usually in a senior level. 1 page for anybody that is junior. And yeah, have your name, have your email, your LinkedIn. Usually you can just have the city and the state that you're in. You don't need to have your address spelled out. So don't worry about that. Just make sure your email is in there and your phone number is in there. And your LinkedIn. And if there's a link to any portfolios that you have, make sure that's on your resume too. So yeah, make it just very simple and practical, easier for us to read.
Yeah, and then another question, if you've seen a problem before that your interviewers ask you, what is the correct way to approach letting them know that? So I can take this one. So, and I think interviewers do know that it's totally possible to have seen the problem before. I think the main thing I'd emphasize is just being honest, because honestly, if you've already solved that problem before and have kind of like memorized the solution to the problem, the interviewer can usually tell that you already know how to solve it. And that kind of defeats the purpose of the interview because it's to get a sense for how you problem solve. So I think it's totally okay to be honest. But if it's like a problem that you've like kind of seen before, but don't really know how to solve, I think in that case, it's totally okay to go about solving it.
Kelly, what's up?
Hey, decided to join the party.
You made it.
Feeling some FOMO over here, so.
All right, let's go to the next question. What's your favorite thing you worked on at Twitter? Shuba, take it. Take this one.
Yeah. My favorite thing so far, well, I haven't been full-time at Twitter for that long, but I would say my intern project, I think coming into Twitter for my internship, I honestly thought I'd be working on some toy project that wouldn't like end up getting used. But actually my project like ended up getting pushed into production and ended up impacting like millions of users. Basically what I worked on was making Twitter faster for a lot of users who live farther away from our data centers, like in countries like in South America or Africa. So basically making Twitter a lot more faster for those users. So it was kind of crazy to think that even as an intern, I was impacting millions of users. So I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, FYI, our interns at Twitter, they don't come to like get us coffee and do photocopies. Like you're doing some real work that is being used by millions and millions of users around the world, just like Shuba said. So proud that you can touch on that, Shuba, because that's definitely the impact our interns make, for sure.
Wait, I'm going to humble brag here really quickly because one of the things that I love most is that I met Shuba on campus years ago. And fast forward to her #developer camp to being an intern. She is now full-time at Twitter, and we are now doing an event together. So we have come full circle here. So you just never know what's going to happen. Yeah, so this right here, Shuba.
Thank Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm so happy to be here.
I cannot wait for us to have this story with somebody that we hired from ShellHacks. It's
Mhm.
like, oh,
Yep.
we met them at ShellHacks. They got hired and now they're the vice president of whatever team. That's exactly the story that I want to say.
Exactly.
So the next question is, how often do you practice for your technical interview, Shuba?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think it kind of varied in cycles. I think around the time when I was like peak recruiting for companies, I was practicing pretty much like every other day, with the majority of my work for practicing on the weekends. And then during the weekdays, I'd schedule time to like practice with my friends and stuff. I think it's pretty tricky, especially when you've got a lot of other classes and your other commitments. Practicing for interviews often just feels like another course that you're taking. So honestly, just squeeze in whatever time you can find. I think the main thing is really just consistency over cramming. I think that pays off a lot. There were quite a few times, when I ended up cramming and, that didn't really end up working well. So eventually, after the first 2 years, I really forced myself to buckle down and consistently practice. So, and I think that really paid off. Does Twitter hire new grad from Canada? Kelly.
Oh yeah, we hire all across the world. So, yep.
Yeah, we also have an office in Canada, Twitter Canada. Every time that there's always like a Twitter Canada, Twitter India. Like we exist in Canada. There's an office in Canada. So we even go to schools in Canada to go hire for interns. So there's a lot of hiring going on Canada too. What's the chance of recursive problems being asked in the technical interview?
That's a really hard question to answer because you can never guarantee like what question you're gonna get. I think just study the different algorithms and data structures topics, especially the main ones. Sometimes, usually if it's a recursive solution that you do have the option to implement, a lot of the times there is an option to also implement a solution that's not recursive. So that could be like a workaround, but I know it can be really tempting to sometimes avoid studying some topics, but you never know what question might show up.
Okay.
Jack does not follow all Twitter employees. Some,
not all.
We're trying. I'm still trying for that.
There's a question: are non-CS majors but with relevant experience considered 100%? Just make sure again that you showcase on your resume that you can do the job that you're applying for. That's all. Like all we need to know is that you're able to perform in the job that we would like to hire you. So the major has to be relevant to what you're applying for. Does Twitter hiring software and machine learning engineers without computer science, data science degree? Yeah, we just answered that. How can I optimize the resume as a non-CS major graduate? Again, make it very focused to the job that you're applying for, the role that you're applying for. So make sure that you add any projects that you've worked, even if you've been part of hackathons, what did you do in the hackathons, and make sure that your resume is very results oriented. So it looks like an example would be, I created this, that did this. So it increased the speed of the process by 25%, or it increased the sales of this team by 15%. So having data, having results is really useful to have in your resume. Can you write down the link for more info on jobs again? Sorry, I didn't catch it. So yeah, it's on jobs. So go to t.co/university. That's where all of our information is, but I'll write it down again. Did you say you mostly work in backend, and which teams? That's Nicole.
Yeah, so I would say I work in a pretty back-end heavy team. It's a combination of a lot of back-end and also infrastructure. My team is called Auth Platform. And yeah, I think a lot of my team, we just really take pride in the work that we do just because we're dealing with like the entirety of Twitter. So we're dealing with like millions of requests per second. And also, even though a lot of people don't know what we actually do, it's basically like if our team didn't exist, Twitter wouldn't stay up. So there's that. So I personally really enjoy working on the back end and on the infrastructure side. It's a lot of like problem solving and collaborating with each other, designing like architecting the solution. So even though it seems pretty back end, it's like pretty collaborative.
Okay, we only have 1 minute.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we cannot go through all of these questions, but you feel free to reach out to us on Discord because we're there too. Let me see if there's any other questions.
I want to get a picture of the three of us up here. Okay, so everybody on the count of 3, ready? 1, 2, 3. All right, got
Kelly takes all the pictures. She is insane. The picture taker is amazing. If I'm going to even to an event during HC, will there be any spots for interview? Nicole, yes, we interview during GHC, so there's chances for you to be able to get an interview, but or at least meet the teams that can potentially move to interview in the future. I wasn't ready. Sorry, Julia. Like that's we catch everybody like that.
You always got to be ready.
Yes. All right. Thank you, everybody. We ran out of time, but we appreciate everybody being here. Yes.
Thank you, Shuba.
Of course.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. I appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Yes.
You bring an energy I've never felt before. Some kind of chemical.